Since the last video on this VGA card that I'm working on, I've made a few updates to the schematic. Primarily, I was overlooking one of the primary concepts that Liquid Nyquist had been chatting about, which was just making sure that I can isolate one set of memory from another so that the 286 can completely control one while the VGA output controls the other. And what I was missing essentially was I had to add, as I'm understanding it, another set of 157. These are these multiplexers. And then I added another set of transceivers down here. And that, I think, is enough hardware basically for me to come in and let the 286 control one of them, let the VGA output control the other, and then I can swap and let the VGA take control of the previous set and let the 286 take control of the other set. So I can write to memory on one, be reading from the other. I can then swap, update the other set of memory, and basically swap back and forth in a way like that. And my PSOC over here will have to take care of the timing just to make sure that that swapping only occurs at the end of the vertical refresh, basically. And I think that is all doable. You'll also notice that I have cleaned up maybe how some of my wiring looks, or how the schematic looks. In general, I'm not real great at making nice clean schematics, but I do get good feedback from time to time and suggestions of how to make it better, and definitely had some recommendations, and I apologize if I gave any of you headaches trying to look at my schematic, but I'll try to make it a little bit cleaner as we go forward. So I did clean this up with these multiplexers so that you can kind of see that I've got stuff coming in from really my ISA card over here, addresses in from my 286 going into each of these multiplexers, and I also have addresses coming from this VGA PSOC going into each of those. And then the output, one set of 5 goes to over here to this first frame, the other goes over to the other frame. So that's kind of how I have set that up. And I do have some of these coming from regs, which is my register down here, and I probably don't have that reflected in this diagram properly, so I should do that at some point here. I'll take these lines right here and delete them, and maybe I'll even do that right now, because these regs will come from down here. So let's see if I can do that decently. Something like that. Okay, so later I'll put in a connection from here down, and I'll connect up these registers to make it look a little bit better. So I'm working on cleanup of that. Something else I wanted to then get into is to figure out what is this really going to look like as I try to start connecting things up. My goal would be to try to get this running on a breadboard, and that might be a pretty good challenge here. If I pull up what that might look like, here is maybe a picture of that. I have laid out all of the components. I believe I've got everything, at least all the key things that are in that schematic. So first things first, I have an adapter that'll go from an ISA slot to ribbon cables to these little adapters. And so I'll have 6 small ribbon cables coming from my 286 ISA slot, and that will give me address, my 24 addresses if I need 24 or 20, whichever I end up using, plus 16 data and plus other miscellaneous signals that I need, like BHE or clock or whatever it might be. But all of that from the 286 will just come in to my breadboard and be locations that I can then plug the rest of the appropriate pins into right up here on this first breadboard. And then I have my pair of PSOCs. One of them is going to generate all the VGA signals, the addresses, the sync signals. The other one is all the glue logic to try to make all of this work. And then here's my oscillator that I'll use to actually drive the VGA circuit. And then I've got my memory here. So I've got maybe one frame, the other frame. I've got the low, the high for each of those. Ultimately, of course, there'd be the VGA output, and I've got my 273 that will go to resistors to the VGA output. But then all the other parts of this schematic should be there. So if I go back to the schematic, the major pieces, I have a whole lot of these. Well, I've got 4 173s for a register. I have a couple 245s along with 4 more 245s, these transceivers. So these transceivers are going to get this frame data out to my 286. These transceivers will get my register that I'm going to use for different configuration settings out to the 286. I have all of these multiplexers plus all of these multiplexers, so a lot of multiplexers on my breadboard. A couple other miscellaneous ICs I'm using for some basic logic, and then that 273 and the resistors and the VGA out that I pointed to earlier. So I think all of that is captured in this, and so that is a full 8 breadboards, and I'm not going to have any space to spare, and it's going to be quite the wiring project, quite honestly. So that is a lot of connections that I'll have to see if I can work my way through. I also wanted to see what would this start to look like if I laid it out on a PCB. And so this is a little bit of the cart before the horse type of thing, but this is what that card might start to look like. And you can see here I'm at about 100 millimeters by, well, let me not mix my units here. Let me flip this back to millimeters, by 272 millimeters. Or that was not quite 11 inches by, what would this be, 3 point something, so almost 4 inches. So 4 by 11 is the size of this card. So it's a pretty healthy size card. Not much larger than my previous video card. I just widened it a little bit to fit this. But I placed my PSOCs off to the left. Here's all of those 157s, a couple miscellaneous ICs, all of my RAM, and then all the rest of these supporting chips for transceivers, etc. And if you want to see that in a 3D view, this is what that might start to look like. This is fully routed, minus there's a few control signals that I still have to figure out how I'm going to make them work. That I need to get connected in between my decode and some of these chips. But other than that, I did go through the exercise of fully routing this just to see if I could get it routed. And then this is only a 2-layer board, and you can see there are obviously a lot of traces, and I tried to do as much fill of copper as I could. Ground copper fill on the bottom and VCC copper fill on the top. But that is looking like that is a reasonable card that I could build if this design ends up playing out okay. That's where I'm at. I just thought I would show you some of the effort I have ahead of me looking at this. So just a lot of work there to be done, and that's going to take me a while. So I'm just going to chip my way through that. Maybe initially I will, like I mentioned in a previous video, just try to get my VGA connected in here to the RAM so that I can be reading and writing that RAM and make sure all that switching between 64K segments works okay. If I can get that done, then I can probably try to get the other set connected in the same fashion, see if I can toggle between those and write and read from them from the 286. And if all of that works, then I'll actually work on the VGA output reading one or the other. So let the fun begin, let the wire cutting and stripping begin, and we'll see how much this breadboard can handle as far as the signals are concerned. I'm sure I'll have some challenges there too, but I'll post some updates as I get some of this functionality hopefully working.